Well, welcome to our first podcast with Practice Mercy. My name is Will McCorkle. I'm an education professor at College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina, and I've been a board member with Practice Mercy for the last few years. We actually started back in 2019, and today we just want to go through a little bit about our history, what our mission has been, and what we're doing in this current moment. I think there's a lot of news out there. There's a lot of podcasts, but we think right now, especially on issues of immigration, especially the way that the church should be responding, there's often a lack of content out there. And so we hope to be a bridge to the rest of the community in the U.S. to know more about what's happening in the immigration system, how the church can be involved. And I'm here with my good friend and president of Practice Mercy, Alma Ruth. So I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, guys. It's a blessing. It is an honor to be here. We're very happy. It's a beautiful surprise. And Dr. Wilma Kirkle and I do a lot of good trouble. So we wanted to share with you what we are. Practice Mercy Foundation is a faith-based, grassroots, relational, and holistic nonprofit that focus on serving asylum seeker women and children. And we visited our first asylum seekers camp in November 2019. And so we are sharing with you our hearts. We want to invite you to walk alongside us as we share our journey, how God has directed us to redeem the narrative of immigration, and how we strongly believe that immigration is a life or death conversation. And as people of faith, we should choose life. And in that, God planted in our hearts a verse from the prophet Isaiah 1:17, seek justice, learn to do right. So we invite you to come with us. We are in the studio of a good friend of ours here in McAllen, Texas. We are in the border region called the Rio Grande Valley. And I was in Charleston speaking this weekend, and people was like, McAllen, how do you pronounce? Where is that? Well, we're far away from everything. We are 10 miles from the Rio Grande River. That's where we are. And so we invite you to come with us and just journey with us as we share with you what we have learned on the ground, serving asylum seekers directly on the asylum seekers encampment, what we do with water immersion teams when we invite people from all over the nation, from all walks of life to come and walk with us across the international bridge. And also through advocacy, Dr. Wilma Kirkle has done an amazing job with advocacy. And so we invite you to see how can we do? How can we choose life? How can we choose joy in what we're doing, and especially in this time in history?
So just to give a little bit of background on the situation that we found ourselves in 2019, and even more so where we find ourselves now, I think it's important to give a little background of that history of asylum and refugee policy. And today I don't want to go into too much depth with that. Maybe on future episodes we'll do more of that history lesson. But a lot of it goes back in U.S. history to World War II, when the U.S., and not just the U.S., but other nations like Canada, Cuba, many nations in the West refused to let in Jewish refugees as they were trying to flee from Adolf Hitler. And at the time, it was something like 85% of Protestants said we don't want to let in Jewish refugees, and 80% of Catholics. It was the majority of the country. And we look back on that in a very shameful way, because we know obviously what happened in the Holocaust. And afterwards, the U.S. and the United Nations, they put forth new policies that people have the right to seek asylum, people have the right to flee violence and danger. And we've never upheld it consistently throughout our history. There's been times where if it's a country that we're aligned with, we don't count people that are coming from that country as refugees. This happened in the 1980s with like Guatemala and El Salvador. But there's also been times where we were very open to refugees and asylum seekers from nations like Cuba, which we were in opposition to. And so, however imperfectly we accepted asylum seekers and refugees, there was this notion that we have a responsibility and a really a duty to do so. But that got put on its head in a lot of ways back in 2018, 2019, during the first Trump administration. They were trying to limit how many people were coming to seek asylum at our border. So they tried different things like a child separation policy, family detention, and they finally landed primarily on this idea of what became known as Remain in Mexico, and later on was expanded to Title 42 during COVID, which said, let's just not let people come in. Let's asylum seekers, they have to stay on the Mexican side. And maybe if we might act like they can have a court date, but we're going to set up the court system that they're almost all going to get denied, almost like a kangaroo court system. And in theory, we're going to be giving money to the Mexican government that they're going to be taking care of these asylum seekers. But what we saw the first time we went in 2019 was basically like a large homeless encampment there in Matamoros, right across from Brownsville, where you have hundreds of people and a group of thousands of people living on the streets, living in these tents that maybe some churches or nonprofits gave them. And it got some attention at first, but it didn't get near the attention as other issues. And so one of the things we've been doing since 2019 has kind of ebbed and flowed. The policies have both, in some ways, stayed consistent and shifted. We've been trying to make people aware of what's happening at our border and then directly assisting migrants that have been waiting there. And so we've been bringing lots of teams down, a lot of churches, educators, advocates to see firsthand what's happening at the border. And especially as a lot of the media has just become so hyperbolic in their language about the border and about migration, helping people to see what the reality is, and meeting firsthand people that are seeking asylum, and hopefully going back and sharing those stories with their communities.
Yes, and it's life changing, and it's something that is very, very important for us to remember as people of faith and people of good conscience, that immigration is a life or death conversation. And as people of faith and as people of good conscience, we should choose life. And many times it is very important to remember foreign policy. We know this because foreign policy is made in Washington, D.C. Our leaders made foreign policy, but the impacts are throughout the world. And also, the foreign policy or the immigration policy that is made in Washington, D.C., are by people who have never been at the border, who have never crossed international breach. And that matters because these people don't know, legally speaking, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. McCorkle, that in order requesting asylum is a legal right. A person can get to the port of entry and request asylum. Is under international law and is under our laws. You can request asylum. It's a legal right. But did you know that in the international bridge, you walk across the international bridge, and in the middle of the bridge, we have Homeland Security federal officers that you have to show your documents in order to keep walking on the international bridge. So an asylum seeker cannot reach a port of entry to request asylum because there is a checkpoint by the United States government with Homeland Security that you cannot keep walking on that. You have to show your documents, your passport and your permanent residency or whatever that is required, and keep going. So that is something that has to be taken in consideration. That is not that easy to request asylum. Why they don't do the legal way? Because there's no legal way to do it. It is very complex. We haven't had immigration reformed since President Reagan. And since President Clinton, we have deterrence by death. I'm going to make it so difficult for you that you will die trying. And did you know that hundreds of people died drowning in the Rio Grande River? And there's no federal agency by either government, Mexico or the United States, that keeps track of the dead. There's a nonprofit at the checkpoint. Do you know we have land checkpoints 100 miles from the Rio Grande River? There's a land checkpoint. We have National Guard soldiers there. We have ICE federal agents. We have Border Patrol agents. We have dogs that are making sure that our borders are safe. And you have to show your documents in order to go to San Antonio, in order to go to Houston, in order to go anywhere 100 miles inside the United States. So our borders are secure. I live in McAllen, and I can assure you that our borders are secure. And of course, they should be, because nobody's advocating for open borders. But we're sharing with you what we see on the ground. We live here. I live here in McAllen. I live a few miles from the Rio Grande River. And of course, we want our border secure. And so we're sharing this. There's a checkpoint on International Bridge, and also there's a checkpoint 100 miles from the Rio Grande River that you have to show your documents. So our borders are not open. And also, so these people fleeing horrific circumstances from different nations, from Russia, Siberia, Venezuela, Cuba, all different nations that are coming to our borders seeking refuge for their children. And also that you and I would say we'll do anything for our children, is what these people are doing. The majority of the people, I would dare to say 90% of the people we serve are women and children, at least, or young families, are trying to keep their children safe.
Yeah, and so I think sometimes we don't understand how quickly things have just shifted over the last 7 or 8 years. And I remember talking about this right when we saw asylum essentially being halted, that this is setting a really dangerous precedent, because once it starts, to even try to go back to the way it was before is seen as this crazy open border policy, when really it's just following our own laws and international law. And so that's exactly what happened over the last few years. This Remain in Mexico policy was put in 2019. In 2020, during COVID, they put in Title 42, which was restricting border crossings for just U.S. citizens and residents. Later on, it basically included everybody who wasn't an asylum seeker. It was no longer about COVID. It was just a way to block asylum seekers from being able to go through that legal process. And that stayed into effect even through most of President Biden's presidency. Now, I think it's important to point out there were more opportunities during his presidency to go through humanitarian parole, some ways around Title 42. And eventually the court said you can't keep this policy of keeping migrants out because of COVID, in 2023 or 2024. Like, this is no longer a legitimate use of this policy. And so you did see an increase in people crossing the border, and it got a lot of national attention. There was a lot of fear mongering that was used. And was everything done perfectly? Of course not. But I think one thing that happened is that there was like a bottleneck that was created. There was so many restrictions, and there's also this feeling of there's probably going to be more restrictions in the future. So there's this little window of a year or two where maybe we have a chance to actually cross. And so the numbers did go up. I would argue overall that was a net benefit for our country. Not that there was no issues with a lot of people going to one city and the infrastructure being affected by that, but overall, especially with our labor shortage, this was a net increase for the United States. And so during this time, like around 2022, 2023, we saw a lot of people coming up, and we worked with a lot of people there at the border. But because this was going back to, in a lot of ways, what our policy had been for the last 30 or 40 years, it was seen as extreme. It was seen as open borders because all of a sudden the goalposts had shifted. And so this time, when President Trump came into office on January 20th and just shut down everything, it was almost seen as like, oh, we're going back to our normal policy, which has not been historically our normal policy. This was the policy that's just been implemented in the last few years. And So I think one of the things that we've seen has been really heartbreaking is that, let's say over the last couple of years, when we met with people in the camps, there's a sense of despair, but also hope. Because it's like, yeah, the situation is difficult. Organized crime is powerful. We're in danger, but even if it's going to take us 6 or 7 months, there's some kind of pathway that we could seek asylum. They would have to go through the app, the CBP One app. Um, but now those avenues, those ways to seek asylum legally have been taken away. And so there's a lot of people that are just, and Alma can speak to this, that are just stuck there at the border. They've sold everything they've had in their countries, or they're from countries where they're political dissidents or there's bounty out on their life and they can't go back. And so they're just stuck in these border cities in Mexico like Reynosa, Matamoros, which are very dangerous, and there's really nowhere to go. And in some ways, their stories have been overshadowed and forgotten, especially with everything else going on with immigration in the nation. We were talking about this morning, but it's like you have, in my perspective, these horrific policies that are being put forward that we're going to try to deport unaccompanied minors, that we're going to send people to Guantanamo Bay, that we're going to send migrants to prisons in El Salvador. We're going to make everyone sign up for a registry. All these illegal and unconstitutional immigration orders. And in some ways, what's happened at the border has almost been forgotten. Like that's kind of the bottom of our list of priorities, even for the American public. And so we want to continue to shed light on this because I think it's an area that's just been overlooked because there is so much going on internally, ICE raids picking up, that we forget what's happening to people that are left here at the border.
Yes. And then there's a verse that God has planted in my heart very, very strongly. John 1:5. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. And now more than ever, we need to let our light shine so people can see our good works and glorify our Father in heaven. And so we have a tremendous opportunity, a historic opportunity to do good, to love mercy, to seek justice, and to walk closely with God and say, hey, God's love is across borders. God's compassion is across borders. And what is my part on this? How can I participate on this life-changing opportunity? Because it's a historic opportunity to save lives, to save human lives. And how can we participate in this? And as people of God, and if we bear His name, we have a tremendous opportunity to say, yes, seek justice and learn to do right. And according to the prophet Isaiah, and even if you are not a person of faith, we have a good opportunity to do the right thing. And so we have an opportunity. We host border immersion teams. We invite you to come and practice an incarnational immersion of what the border is like. You're gonna walk across the bridge with us. You're gonna hopefully meet some asylum seekers on either side of the border. You will learn of the root causes of migration. You will learn about the theology of migration and how can we serve our world and serve God at the same time in a beautiful, beautiful way.
Yeah, and as Alma was saying, in some ways, I think this is the moment for the church to wake up.
Yes.
We've unfortunately been kind of bamboozled slowly into positions and ideas that we never would have imagined 10 years ago. But this is what happens when churches follow a singular leader, and no matter what that leader says, they go down that path. And unfortunately, the ire of a lot of this anger and this resentment has fallen on migrants, and especially asylum seekers. And it's turned us from a country that's, at least in theory, however imperfectly, we were this asylum that, is talked about in the Statue of Liberty, to a nation that is becoming increasingly anti-immigrant and xenophobic. And it's really the church's, um, at this moment, the church needs to decide, are they going to follow in the ways of Jesus, or are they going to follow a political leader which has a message on immigration and on immigrants that is in many ways the very opposite of the message of Jesus. And so this is, I think, a call for the church right now, because um, we're going to remember what happened in this moment. The future generations are going to remember where the church stood. I think back to what happened in countries like Germany, Spain. I think Spain in particular, right, where the church, especially the Catholic Church, right, just aligned itself with Franco, no matter what kind of human rights abuses he committed. And for the next generations, it was hard for young people to take the church seriously. Right? If you're going to align with such human rights abuses, then why do you, um, what does your message of Jesus tell us? I was actually listening to an audiobook this week about this in Germany, and it said how the church has continued to preach Christ crucified. This is in the lead up to Hitler's takeover, right? They were preaching Christ crucified all the while the Jews were being crucified in their nation. And so I think that's a point where we have to really examine what's going on. And there's so much going on that it's easy to often check out. I think that's the danger, right? It's just so much happening. But I think being able to reach out to those in your community, whether that's ideally coming to the border with us or reaching out to members of the immigrant community in your local communities, churches, organizations that are getting involved, is more vital now than ever.
Yes, but the important part is that we need to do something. It's not the time to stay quiet. It's not the time to do nothing. There is Irish, British philosopher in the 1800s, Sir Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. So that is not an option. Whatever you can do it well, do it with joy, like Reverend Eugene Cho says. And so let's do that. Let's make a little impact in the world. And through our grassroots nonprofit, God has saved dozens of human lives. Russian young family traveling with infants from, to our southern border, Mayan Guatemalan women trekking through Mexico to our southern border, Cuban doctors that found the Lord through the Darien Gap. But whatever it is, our participation matters, our voice matters, and we need your voice, your prayers, your support, your visit. We call it ministry of presence. I cannot resolve your situation right now, but I'm right here and I'm praying with you and I'm praying for you. And I'm reminding you that God's love is here, present with you, because God's love is across borders, it's across nations, it's across ethnicity. One of my favorite verses in the last book of the New Testament in Revelations, it says, "Therefore I saw before the throne people of every nation, every tribe, and every language." That God is a God of diversity and He loves every nation that is coming to our borders. And what a beautiful and wonderful opportunity that we can share that right now in this time in history.
Right. I think not to preach on the podcast here, but I think in this moment too, realizing in Ecclesiastes it talks about there's a time for everything, and realizing the time that we're in right now, because you're going to hear people that are in positions of power throw out Bible verses to try to keep the status quo, or to really justify oppressing, especially immigrant populations. The favorite passage that is always used is Romans 13, which was of course used by Nazi Germany and was used by the slaveholders and Jim Crow, to just obey the authorities, keep quiet. And there's a time and a place, right, for that. There's a time for meekness. There's a time to just live peacefully and peaceably and pray for your leaders. And those are all values that are important. But there's also a time I think of Luke 4 when Jesus calls out the nationalism of the leaders and they try to throw him off the cliff. There's a time to turn over tables. And going back to Revelation, right, there's a time that we have to be very bold in saying, are we going to follow the way of the Lamb or the way of the beast? And I think that's the moment we're in right now. This is a crucial moment because unfortunately, this anti-immigrant movement has been largely been uplifted and supported by those who claim to be following Jesus. And so for Christians of good conscience who see what's going on and say this is wrong, it's not enough to just say we're going to sit back and not get involved. We in some ways have this special responsibility to speak up because the way that Christianity has been distorted and misused to justify xenophobia and oppression. And this is nothing new, right? We see this throughout history. I live in South Carolina, and the same dynamic happened with slavery and Jim Crow, right? The slave owners, the people that were supporting Jim Crow had Bible verses that they would use, some of the same ones being used today to try to say what we're doing is right. But of course, it goes against the very heart of Jesus because, as we saw also in Luke 4, right, the devil can quote scripture. So being very careful of how that's being used in this moment. Whenever scripture is used by the powerful to justify oppressing others, it's being distorted.
Yes, and it's very important that we, I don't know more about American politics, right? It's very complicated. I know just the basics. But you have an elephant and you have a donkey, red and blue. But we invite ourselves, we invite you to follow the ways of the Lamb, and the ways of Jesus. And we invite you to that. And so it's the time. Now is the time. So we invite you. We are on Instagram, Practice Mercy. You can find us there. We have a website, practicemercy.org. And this name is very prophetic. We invite you to practice mercy. Mercy is not earned, it's given by God as a gift to others. So we invite you to practice mercy with us, to come and see us. We promise good Mexican food. And hopefully that's a plus. And so we are on Facebook as well. We have a Facebook page, Practice Mercy. So please join us, practicemercy.org. We appreciate your prayers. We appreciate your support. And something really cool that happened in Charleston to me. We share that we are a faith-based organization and we're grassroots and we need funding, right? Everybody needs funding. And so I have a small group I call my Frappuccino team. These are grad students or college students that give $5 a month. They're Frappuccino. They give $5 a month, $10 a month to our nonprofit. And that has sustained us. That has helped us to sustain us. It's a faithful group. They've been doing it for like a year and a half. And so our Frappuccino team, $5 a month. For our college students, it can matter. So they are doing their little part and making it sustainable. So our heart this year is to make our nonprofit sustainable. And so your help will be highly, highly appreciated. And we're available to speak as well. If you would like any of us in our team, all of us, I'm the founder for Practice Mercy. Dr. Will McCorkle is a founding member of our board. And the rest of our team are very seasoned people who have served faith leaders, who have helped serve on the field. We go directly to asylum seekers camp on the Mexico side of the border. And we go and look for the women and children that are there. Pregnant women first, women with infants, women with babies. We try to keep track of them so they're safe on a weekly basis. And once they're legally able to cross the international bridge, we connect them with churches and nonprofits and organizations that can help them on their immigration journey. And we know the people we serve. So if you think of that is a matter of national security, what we do is a matter of national security because we know the people we serve. We know where they come from. We know what they're doing, where they're going. And Sandra from El Salvador, she's in Boston. Kenya from Honduras, oh, she's in Minneapolis. Jason, oh, Honduras. He's in Miami. They still, if they don't lose our phones, they still keep in contact with us. And what a blessing that is, that the people you serve on the ground, on the dirt, in an asylum seeker camp, that is worse than a refugee camp, because United Nations is not monitoring the camp. It's worse than that. Like Dr. McCorkle said, it's like a homeless camp, everybody for themselves. And so to go there and serve them, what a beautiful way it is. And remember in the Gospel of Matthew 25, what you did to the least of this, you did it to me, Jesus said. So we invite us all to keep heart and to be brave and to keep going what is right.
Yeah, and I think, especially, and a lot of people, different people might be listening to this podcast, but especially those who are part of the church, who are Christians, thinking about the people that we serve, and a lot of times they're fleeing because of their faith. And so it's a whole other level of, we're rejecting people that are fleeing because they're being persecuted for their Christian faith. Not that's the only reason we should be accepting people for asylum, but we've worked with people directly. One of the people that we worked with the most was a young pastor from Russia who fled because, as he would describe it, there was a cult of Putin in Russia that the whole Orthodox Church and unfortunately most of the Protestant evangelical church had fallen into. Putin said he's the one for the traditional values. He's the one that's going to go against the liberalism of the West. And a lot of the church just fell straight in line. And so when he spoke out against what was happening and Russia invading Ukraine, there was a choice to basically be beaten, put in prison, or to leave. And people like that are still in a dangerous spot because they've not been granted asylum. There was just a story this past week of Iranian young lady from Iran who converted to Christianity, which can carry the death sentence, and came to the U.S. and was just deported to Panama. Another group of Iraqi Christians. And so looking really hard, I think the American church has to look at itself really hard in the mirror saying, who are we following and who is our allegiance to? Because if we're okay with Christians from Russia and Iran basically being deported to be killed because of our nationalism, like we've missed Jesus. Like Jesus has nothing to do with that. And there's those dramatic stories, but there's also like the stories you don't hear about, where it might be someone that's refusing to join a gang in Honduras or Guatemala because of their Christian faith, and because of that, they're in danger and they have to leave. And it's another way they're really standing for their faith. It might not be in the same public way that we would think of, but we found a lot of people in that situation that they refuse to join into these systems of violence, and they're seeking refuge. And as the church that has some of the most privileges, if not the most privileges in the entire world, if we don't open our hands to these people, we're in a lot of ways denying the gospel.
And did you know that the refugee church will strengthen the faith of the American church in this generation and the generation to come? They've gone through hell. They have held nothing but the Bible and the scriptures and Jesus. I had a pregnant sister in Christ from Haiti. She crossed the Daring got pregnant, and they stayed with me because we were, getting ready, finding help for them to go to Florida. And their Bible was all warped, right? And I said, Remy, did you cross the Daring Gap with this Bible? Yes, sister. When we were crossing through rivers, we will pull up the backpack so it won't get wet. And who knows if you and I would endure all the life circumstances that these beautiful people have endured and have our faith so close and so rich. So we invite you to do that. We invite you to consider how the refugee church will strengthen our faith in the American church. And something that really hit me with Dr. McCorkle is, who is our allegiance to? And that is so important, because if you bear the name of Jesus, if you say that you're a Christian, you are obliged by the Gospels and the Mount Sermon of the Mount. How is that going to be? So we invite you to resist darkness with joy and to do the right thing. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for spending time with us and asylum seekers. And just a practical reminder. Okay, let's shut down the border. Let's close down the border. Let's send them back. Who's going to pick up our tomatoes? Who's going to build our roofs? Who's going to clean our hospital? Who's going to cook our meals in fancy restaurants in Minneapolis or Chicago? All those cooks are Mexicans. You go to the kitchen, they all talk in Espanol. And so, we are a nation of immigrants. That's who we are. And diversity and colors and textures and ethnicities enrich our society. Don't make it less. They enrich our society.
Yeah, and I would, end with here that so I used to be a middle school and high school history teacher, and so I think in some ways that influences the way I see what's going on right now. And there's a temptation with all that's going on um, to just check out. But we have a lot of things to distract us, right? So we can just put on Netflix or let's scroll through social media and we can just say, you know what, I don't even want to get involved. It's too complex. I don't want to negatively affect my mental health by getting involved. And that's kind of an easy strategy to do. And on top of that, to be honest, a lot of this immigration work is coming under attack, even those who are supporting migrants. The attorney general here in Texas went after Sister Norma, of all people, the Catholic nun here, for helping with immigrant communities, and accused her of human trafficking. And so there's also a sense of like, I don't even want to speak out because there could be repercussions. But what I would encourage y'all in this moment, and something that we have to tell ourselves every day is, when we look back on history, what were we doing in this moment? We always think about looking back at authoritarian governments, what happened in Germany, what happened during the civil rights movement in the South, right? And there was a lot of people that just chose to say, that's too much. I don't want to get involved. Actually, that was the majority of people. The majority of people were not out marching in the streets with Martin Luther King. But there was enough people that it actually made a substantial difference. And so that's what our call is right now. That's what we're asking y'all to take that next step and get involved. Because it's going to be more tempting than ever to just check out. And that's kind of the strategy that's being used, is just, let's just throw so much stuff at the wall that people become disoriented and they don't know where the center of gravity is. And it's easy to get so disheartened by things that you're just like, I don't care anymore. But what we plead for y'all is to continue to get involved, to stay informed, and to not to get involved less now, but actually to get involved more, because it's needed more than ever.
Yes, and we have a video, from our work on the field to share with you, so you can see it.
Let's say we'll play this here. Maybe Alma, if you want to talk through a little bit of what's going on in the video here.
Yes, as I mentioned to you, we want you to do an incarnational visit, meaning you're going to walk across the International Bridge, visit encampments like this. We have had Haitians, Russians, Central Americans, and this is one of the camps that we will visit. Dr. McCorkle leads us in Eyeglass Clinic, and we focus on the women and the children or families with young children. And we go and speak with them. We go and ask for their names in a dignified way so they can redeem their story. We pray for them. We give basic feminine hygiene products, multivitamins for children, whatever we can do to help them recover their humanity, recover their dignity. And this is one of the eyeglass clinics that Dr. McCorkle leads us on. And it's such a blessing because many of them break their glasses. So a lot of the women and their children that we serve, they request prayer, or we offer prayer for them. This is a team of educators from South Carolina that came and help us because they receive a lot of the kids, migrant kids that arrive in their state. And so this is a wonderful opportunity for us to do that.
So as Alma's mentioned, we'd love for y'all to join us. If you aren't able to actually come to the border, if you would be willing to share this podcast, support us financially in the work that we're doing, and continue to share with others about what is happening, and that we don't lose this idea that people have the right to seek asylum. It's something that is very much in danger, and so I think keeping your voices present, continue to speak out and saying that we have to continue to be this asylum and refuge that at least we've always sought to be in the United States. However imperfectly we've done that, that we don't lose that vision and that basic morality that we tried to uphold in our nation. So, I don't know if you had anything else to add.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for our friend that, God has given him the opportunity to launch this studio. It's such a blessing. And he's a leader of faith, a person of faith, and also a professional journalist. So we're so thankful for him. And so thankful for Dr. Wilma Kirkle. We visited our first asylum seekers encampment for the first time in Thanksgiving 2019, and God changed our lives. And so thank you so much. PracticeMercy.org. We are on Instagram as well. God bless you.
God bless.